What you just talked about there is something that I was thinking when you were talking earlier, which is I love technology. I say everybody knows that I use it for good, not evil. I'm not a kind of person who sits and scrolls on an Instagram. I'm aware of the psychological impact of a like button. I was able to go through my entire high school career without ever needing to deal with cyberbullying. I was bullied, and not to say that analog bullying was any better than or easier than cyberbullying. The beeper was the height of technology in my high school, Keith. I know that there's an important question here around balance and around use cases. And at the CoSN conference coming up very soon here in March 28th to 23rd, Austin, Texas, come and join us. I'm going to be delivering a workshop on socio-emotional skills. You mentioned that term earlier as well. So what is the balance, or what is something you've seen in terms of this trajectory of change and evolution around we need to teach people, and I'm saying this about a kindergarten student, and I'm saying it about a fourth year university student. I would argue in a continuing ed, or I know we should have had it in my doctoral program. This emphasis on you developing as a human being and developing skills to manage your emotions and interact with others, as examples, and subject matter expertise, and then technology. Have you seen technology come into the classrooms and help support a balance of both subject matter expertise and socio-emotional skills? Have you seen socio-emotional skills get really diminished in some districts? Like, what has been that interplay with the introduction of technology for those outcomes?
I think that's a great question. And technology, I don't think is inherently good or bad. So it's how we design and use it. So there's no question that many students, many teachers, many parents, many adults feel that, social media is distracting or harassing or bullying or things like that. So I think what the pandemic proved or brought home was that, having been with CoSN for 28 years, I will say that pre-pandemic, the word social emotional learning was not a priority that was ever discussed at our annual conferences or things like that. However, during the pandemic, well-being became a number one concern of educators. And so technology leaders, I think the prism is when the way we're designing the technology, does it enhance or take away from well-being? That is a core question to be asking. And so you asked, are there examples where technology has improved or helped well-being? So I think there's some interesting examples of how technology is helping to assess where students and teachers are. So it's pretty simple technology, but at the start of many classrooms, the student is asked, with the smiley face, are you happy, neutral, or sad? Well, that feedback gives immediate information to the teacher. There may be individuals who are really unhappy about something that's happening as they arrive in the classroom. Right. And if a lot of those kids have that situation, maybe what we first have to do is address what the concerns are that's happening. So that's
amazing. That's kind of like I'm envisioning. I don't know why I'm envisioning them at the airport, but those things that the laboratories
when you go in the
bathroom.
bathroom.
The green, the red, the yellow. Why so many bathrooms, Keith? I'm very concerned. But so it's anonymous, this data. So a student clicks this button, and then a teacher is getting the register of like 65% of the students are green, 25% of the students are yellow, and so on.
Yeah, I think in a classroom situation it would be aggregated, but there's no. I would think the school system would have to think, but it could be very useful to have, to tie to the student information system and the teacher to know who's struggling at the moment.
No, it's amazing. I've used the polling structure in Zoom when I was teaching during the pandemic, or online teaching now. And sometimes because I'm teaching in the continuing ed space, I get them after like 6 o'clock at night. And one of my first questions sometimes is like, how hungry are you? Because it matters to how you learn, how hungry you are.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
No, that's fascinating. And I think it's really important. And now I'll zoom us back out. And thinking of, we can talk more about the CoSN conference specifically, but thinking about leadership, I feel like too often, because one of the things I'm most excited about attending the conferences here, Keith, is the conversations, like you say, having these conversations. And one of the things I think, not just because I'm a teacher, it's not just because I'm a teacher, I think students are our end game. Yes, I completely understand that they're the point of service. People in the public sector hate it when you say client, but they are. At the end of the day, teachers are, the same way that there are theories now about entangled pedagogy, where teaching and technology, we'll hear more about this at my keynote at CoSN conference, come on down. Teaching and technology are no longer separate. We have to consider them one thing. I really don't see teachers as separate from students. That right. The quality of a student's experience is inextricably linked to the wellness of an instructor, the skill set of the instructor, how socio-emotionally adept and aware is the instructor who's teaching about that concept in the schools. How do you feel educators are involved in CoSN's work at the leadership level? Because I know sometimes when we zoom out and we get to that leadership level, we can kind of, unfortunately and not intentionally, leave some frontline practitioners we'll come back to you later.
Yeah, well, I think that's always the risk, is when you move up the hierarchy, that you become farther and farther away from your stakeholders and understanding what they need, want, and if you don't have the ear to the ground, getting that, and I think too often we leave out the student. We, teachers like this or don't like this, but what does it mean for the learner, the student? Is
there an element of research or data collection in terms of these things going out, or something you're privy to that you're not leading necessarily, but something you're privy to in terms of, here's some technology, we think it was supposed to address this hurdle, we thought of this one as an accelerator, we thought it was an enabler, but then we've looked at some of the data in practical use?
Well, let me give an example. So during the pandemic, in fact, pre-pandemic, there were lots of surveys that were done about students, how many students don't have access of the internet or a device at home. And that's surveys are estimates and fine. But what we wanted to look at was actual data of what the student experience was. And so with the help of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we went to 13 school districts with 1.5 million students and looked at the network and at what the experience was during remote learning for students. And what we found was that even students that were, quote, connected and had a device, those were the two criteria that traditionally school administrators and policymakers and school boards thought about. It didn't tell what the experience was like. And in fact, a large number of students, even if they were connected, it wasn't working. Today we're doing, a Zoom connection, and that's because video was changing the expectations. In the United States, our Federal Communications Commission says that a highly connected household, and I'll get geeky for just 1 second, is 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up. This is as geeky as I can get, because I'm not.
I love it. It's like a new language.
But the 25 megabits down is fine if we're watching Netflix movie, but the 3 megabits up is me being able to communicate with you. And that 3 isn't enough for even one student learning, let alone when we had both parents at home. And 60% of our households with children have 2 or more children. Mm-hmm. So thinking about like giving a hotspot to a family that was unconnected, you can't think of, you need to think about the needs of the individual learner, not whether the household is connected or not. We also found a lot of other things that, school districts tend to buy the cheapest device. It's fine to buy inexpensive devices, but you better check your specs to make sure it can do video conferencing. There are different, I'll take Chromebooks just as an example. You can buy a Chromebook, but there are 3 different levels, and it has to be the highest 3rd level in order to do video conferencing. It just won't work without it.
See, here you go, bringing up another big issue again, Keith, this idea of short-term versus long-term thinking. Yeah. Because now in a world as uncertain as our own, I have many conversations with folks at the leadership level in institutions here in Canada about what does preparedness look like? What is a robust investment? People like saying that. We have $100,000 as a district. We have $100,000 as an institution. How do we spend that $100,000 so we are, quote unquote, because everybody loves this term, future-proofing, right? Future ready. And is it that we just can't possibly do that? Is it that we have some information in terms of AI capabilities, video conferencing now after the pandemic? Like, do we have some hints in terms of what some of these big things to be accountable for and to in order to long-term plan? Do you feel like we have a sense of that or no?
Boy, you ask very difficult questions.
I know, I try.
And I don't know how much of an issue this is in Canada, but right in the United States, there's been a huge infusion of one-time funding for the pandemic, of which we're still spending. We have another, let's say, year or so. But then there's an enormous funding cliff. And so that, in the past, when we wanted, let's say, to do a 1-to-1 environment, it would be a 4 or 5 year plan, and you'd roll out. Well, that wasn't possible. It was an emergency situation. Overnight on March 13th, our children were sent home. That by the next Monday or early the next week, they needed a device. They needed to be connected. But now we have so many devices that were all purchased at the same time, and they're all going to get old at the same time.
Yes. Wow.
So, superintendents, school boards, particularly finance officers and technology leaders, need to be working to develop budgets that we don't go off a cliff, that large portions of our students all of a sudden no longer have the kind of equipment in order to be connected.
Education doesn't exist in isolation. And unfortunately, the economic, the social structures, and the political systems are all short-term thinking in a lot of ways, like how many politicians are there and they're like, I'm only here. It's the next person's problem. It's not my problem. It's going to be the next person's problem. So I see that cliff coming, but I'm going to jump ship.
But I'm going.
Or jump car. It's a ship would require water, Michelle. No, it's all very exciting. In some of these areas, what is it that because the equity issue is particularly close to my heart, just because I feel like it's so hard. It's so hard and it has so many different facets to it, like equity across gender, socioeconomic strata, racial identification. Like there are so many different forms and facets to equity. I'm really looking forward at the conference to looking at how people are approaching that hurdle, which may be the same, but in a new context. Yeah. What is it that you're looking forward to about the conference, Keith?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to your keynote. So that will be a highlight. And, I think one of the things that I'm always thinking about is how do we invent the future that we want? Having run a technology association for a long time, I get the question of, can you help me predict what are the things that are most important? And prediction is fraught with problems. Even the people who invented the technologies in the past that were profound, Thomas Edison said that AC current would never be widely used. The guy Marty Cooper, who invented the cell phone, said it would never replace landlines.
Yeah, I just heard Tesla said Einstein's idea of relativity wasn't going to take off, had no practical implications.
So even those who were the inventors of the future didn't see it. So how can we as the bystanders? But what I think we can do is define what kind of future we want and let the inventors make the tools that help that help make that happen.
No, I love that. And that's definitely one of the ways I'm approaching it, as being part of the education revolution for whatever blip I exist for. I feel like it needs to be in community. It needs to be in collaboration. And
Right.
I have a certain set of skills, and you have a certain set of skills, and our chief information officer has a certain set of skills, and our marketing and our, everybody. If I'm not going to learn everything, we need to be together and
Yeah.
impart our expertise on the kinds of problems or questions we're asking ourselves. In our last 10 minutes here, Keith, I wanted to take you through some rapid fire questions. I was going to call them rapid fire questions. But then I realized that I'm an educator and I should probably call them ticket out the door questions.
Okay.
For those of you who might not be in the field of education listening to this podcast, there is a pedagogical strategy where students can self-pace when they leave the classroom. They're given one last task, or a task in groups or pairs or whatever. And then when they complete it, they come to the teacher, and that's the ticket out the door. So here are some 10 questions for you, Keith, your ticket out the door. Complete this phrase for me. Teaching is?
Preparing students for today and tomorrow.
Excellent. Learning
is not bounded by the classroom.
Oh, that's a deep one. Education systems are?
Inherently slow moving.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of pain subsides once you accept that fact.
Maybe I should say school systems have live by inertia.
Yes, it's true. I think of the Titanic. Whenever, I think of the Titanic.
It moves, but it moves really slowly.
I'm sorry, the iceberg was there. I turned it. I went hard to left, but unfortunately, we were too big. What's someone in the field of education or ed tech leadership? What's someone that's inspired you, or someone that's still inspiring you?
Well, we've named our Lifetime Achievement Award. He's now deceased, but after Seymour Papert, who some of us consider the father of ed tech, and of course was a protege of Piaget, and started logo language for students, and I think he's very inspiring.
I've read a lot of his work too. We're talking about teaching and learning, and we're lifelong learners here, Keith. What's something you're learning? Is there a hobby or something you're trying to learn? What is a habit or skill that you're working on developing?
Well, immediately after our conference, I'm going skiing, because nothing clears my mind more than throwing myself off a mountain, and it clears out the clutter so that I can be refreshed and renewed.
Oh, that's amazing. It's not the ed tech cliff we're approaching.
It's a cliff that I don't necessarily want to go off a real cliff, but I zooming down a mountain makes me a better person as I stop all the little things that I worry about so that I can make it safely down the mountain.
It reminds me of flow science, and feeling in flow. That's your flow space. I love it.
Yes.
What are you excited about? Oh no, let's start with worried, because you got to end on a positive, more of a positive note. What is something that worries you about the future of education? I mean, we've talked about a few potential hurdles that might.
I think that the narrative by some politicians and some educators that remote learning was a failure. I think it was an emergency situation. It was not, it couldn't be well thought out, but it was essential that we did what we had to do. That isn't necessarily the way that, but there are things we can learn from it. The good news is, okay, well, you're going to ask me what the good news is.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so to paraphrase that is, you're worried that people, this whole thing that we're trying to teach students, that failures aren't failures, they're opportunities to learn, they're opportunities to grow. You're worried that that's going to be like, there are these overarching
it's like, oh, well,
political narrative.
in some school districts now, it's like, well, we can't do any uh, um, distance education because it was a failure. So
Wow.
I think that's a misunderstanding. But what gives me hope is
Yeah. What gives you hope, Keith?
what gives me hope is that overnight we saw that change is possible. When we have an imperative, we actually can do big things fast. It doesn't take a 5-year plan. We can, if we get serious about it, take some action.
And we did. We saw, and every day in the field of innovation, I couldn't agree with you more that the word failure in our own minds and in the minds of how we systemically are talking and building narratives as a culture and as a world, it needs to be, we need to be approaching life as we would as an individual, where nothing is perfect and you grow and you fall, you stumble, just as a child does, and you get back up and you learn how to walk. It's no different. We think of ourselves as different as we age, but ultimately it's that same process just repeating itself. Last but not least, Keith, as an individual, someone who's worked for 28 years at one of the most pivotal organizations for K-12 innovation, what is the legacy that you would like to have as someone who's worked in this field and been a thought leader, especially when it came to digital transformation and this idea of, it's a big word to use at the end of the podcast, but this idea of integrating technology with purpose, with meaningful intention in some of the youngest learners we've got. What do you want to be your legacy? No pressure. I ambled for a little bit so that I gave you a few minutes. Doesn't need to be in stone and never change, but just something you might want to be remembered for.
I'm really proud of the fact that we kind of created an organization before a career path. And that we've been inventing what that means along the way to help system leaders defining what the skills are they need and how to create community, connect with others, and hopefully demonstrate that they're a high-performing leader. And to me, the greatest impediment to effective use of technology isn't technical or technological, it's people. And so that's where we need to start, is us.
This is the most perfect soundbite, Keith. I got nothing to add. I feel that it's a perfect example of when putting a cart before the horse makes perfect sense. And, you can see how things come into being. It's that vision. It's front loading that vision, that understanding that that's the main hurdle. This is what the accelerators we have at our disposal. This is how we're going to use technology and enable the building of a structure that we can hire the people that are so integral to the management, the maintenance, and the day-to-day madness of a system of education.
And I think we're always hampered by what we've already lived through. So when the automobile was invented, it was called a horseless carriage. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of the early automobiles, but they were literally a carriage, very thin wheels, very, with a motor. And sometimes our language and what we think is possible gets held back. But together, I think we can, have those inventors. We can become our own inventors and design our learning for the future.
Invent our future, just like you said. So I think that happens, like you also mentioned, through conversations. I'm very excited about the CoSN conference, March 20th to 23rd in Austin, Texas. We'll continue some of the conversations there. And I cannot thank you enough for taking some time to have this conversation with me today.
Great being with you.
Thanks, Keith. The Education Revolution podcast is produced in-house by community members, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Sangara. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and head over to my website to opt in for my newsletter for more ways to connect with some of these big ideas.